Good morning. So the Maryland Historical Society has an exhibit that it started in the fall and runs through October of this year, entitled Structure and Perspective, and it features new works juxtaposed with some of the works of the collection, the permanent collection at the Historical Society, and the idea is for it to explore Maryland's social landscape, both contemporarily and I think looking at the past as well. We are really privileged and pleased to have back to Gilman with us the artist whose work is featured in this exhibit. His name is David Brewster, and all of you, I think, got a little handout here with his bio on the back. So in the interest of time, instead of going through his bio right now, I will simply say to Mr. Brewster and his extended family and group of friends who are with us today, welcome back to Gilman. It's great to have you here, and the podium is yours.
Good morning. I haven't been back here in 42 years. The last time was in 1976, and I sat right over there on that aisle. Mr. Smythe, members of the faculty, and to the students, it is a pleasure to be here. And I also want to thank Nancy Swindell, who really initiated this occasion. She has had 4 sons who have graduated from Gilman, and has 5 grandchildren who are in process. I think 2 of those have graduated as well. This is a PowerPoint, and it's very much a collaboration, which I need to thank Carl Connolly and Jody Plusnik and Chris Flint. So I want to demonstrate how the power of art positively teaches us how to live and to love. Human beings have always been motivated by the inner necessity to create order out of chaos, and especially to understand the complexity of our feelings and the way the world appears to us in a time of uncertainty and ever change, and especially gives us the capacity to have human empathy. So using paired images of current Gilman students involved in athletics, academics, and artistic pursuits, I will show how the mesmeric power of art can lead to a deeper self-discovery of self, and that is emotional intelligence. I think you'll find how striking these interrelations related to the highest expressions of art animate our common human experience, regardless of epoch, regardless of religion or age. There's a family resemblance throughout civilization. So a wonderful benefactor, Bill Carey, who has been very generous to Gilman School, commissioned me to do a suite of work that's now in the Carey Business School. And this is an interesting triptych, because you can see Carey Hall on the left. This was on the far right is Homewood, which was the original campus, Gilman campus, in 1897. And centrally is the dining room in the Federal Mansion where Charles Carroll entertained his guest. This painting is the interior of Sharp Street Church, which is the first African-American church in Maryland, the first American Methodist church, and you can see the 1890 Gothic structure outside the big Palladium window. This is a painting of the Great Baltimore Fire, which occurred in 1904, which you may not be aware of, but it destroyed almost entirely the financial district in downtown Baltimore and was stopped by Jones Falls River in Harbor East. On the left is a painting I actually currently live in Vermont, and that is the Vermont State House, built in 1857, which also was ravaged by fire. And, as an artist, as a writer, as a thinker, it's important to stand on the shoulders of the giants, of all the people that came before us. And the painting on the right is by Frederick Church of American Wilderness, which totally gave me, informed my ability to tackle this historic fire. This is a painting currently installed in the Historical Society called McDee's Playland Arrest. We're all familiar with the Baltimore uprising that took place in 2015 and the unfortunate demise of Freddie Gray, who unnecessarily died. And it's an ongoing struggle between police brutality and citizens in the inner city who are unnecessarily harassed. On the upper left-hand corner, you see sort of this perforated sky. I often paint with paint rollers, which you'll see more often, but that simulates the experience of bullet holes, even though this gentleman is just merely arrested. Again, related to the Baltimore uprising, this on the left is called Roman Soldier, but the National Guard came in during those intense riots. And the gentleman on the right is just an itinerant man along the interstate. I call him Caged Tiger as a symbol of tenacity and survival in the midst of this brutal oppression. But notice that regardless of the individual's occupations, the white of the eyes, it provides, it demonstrates first and foremost their humanity. The most significant painting I did for the Maryland Historical Society was inspired by the painting of the James Gidding family on the right, which was a prominent Baltimore family in the end of the 18th century. And you can see James Gidding holding a shaft of wheat. And in the left, you can just see out the window, there's maybe 50 slaves that are making him very wealthy. And so you can see in my interpretation, there are a new representation of what a 21st century family could be. So I depicted a biracial gay couple with their child, embodied in the symbol of gay pride, which is the triangle. And unlike the slaves in the wheat field on the left of the James Gidding piece, painted by Charles Wilson Peale, you see the uprising. And it's important to distinguish the uprising from the riots, because the uprising, even though it was a tumultuous time in Baltimore, the uprising embodies everybody, all races, all peoples, of all backgrounds, wanting, desirous of equality. Again, the painting on the left is called Hovering, and it points to the unacceptable poverty in this nation, and especially in Baltimore. I know firsthand because I've walked those streets, and the idea is this guy who wants to work. Everyone is desirous of work. We all are born with a sense of duty. And this gentleman doesn't have the expectations that we all have. So he's suspended in space. He doesn't have his feet on the ground. And it's juxtaposed next to Francesco Goya of men. It's called The Forge. And you can just see the strength of these people, content, engaged in their work. Now, hopefully you all are aware of the great masterpiece by Edward Manet, a French painter, painted in 1862. And this painting it's hard to imagine because you're exposed to everything on the internet. This was a scandalous painting. Imagine this starkly lit nude woman picnicking with these young dandies your age in street dress. And the painting is, someone has imposed contemporary detritus. You can see plastic bags floating in the trees, things that you would see in our environment today. I juxtaposed it next to a portrait that I did of a transgendered woman. And it's called St. Sebastian's Brianna. The reason being that St. Sebastian was a Christian martyr who was tied up to a stake and shot with arrows because of his faith, because of his emotional intelligence, because he stood up for who he was. And this portrait was painted directly from life, and this is a person who struggled so much with her identity that and inflicted so much pain that eventually committed suicide. So it's a significant interpretation. Global warming. So the piece, you can obviously see the polar ice cap melting. I mean, this is a real issue. Flooding. Logan Airport in Boston is going to be underwater in not so long. Lower Manhattan, Florida. I was struck by, we're so obsessed, we're a culture so obsessed with iPhones and selfies that in the advent of a trip, if you were a tourist to the polar ice cap, surely there would be someone, sunbathing and taking a selfie. It's a parody of our culture. The volatility of our times. You have to understand that artists are people, they're educators first and foremost, and so they need to exaggerate the visible realities of our times to convey truth, hard truths. And the painting on the left is a painting I did of Donald Trump in his limo, but his portrait is framed by the side view mirror of his limousine. And it's called Chasing Trump's Tornado. And you see this, explosive dust storm behind him. And, I juxtapose it next to the exploding jet to just kind of overdo to convey to you, to convince you of just that tension that we all feel, that sense of anger and fear that is in our world. We're missing a slide, but let's go on. So this is what I do. I am largely a plein air painter. I do work in the studio, but I am interested in confronting what I call the visible reality of our times, the aspects of our environment that are iconic, but not necessarily picturesque. And I'm convinced that that's how we all have an opportunity to advance our insight and our intelligence about the incongruities of our times is by standing up against it and trying to make order out of it, make sense of it. My approach to painting is a rather athletic activity. I usually execute a piece in one sitting, and it reminds me of a sports performance requiring enormous focus, concentration, and then you execute the action with great elan. I paint primarily with 6-inch, 8-inch foam paint rollers, and have, over the years have developed a adroit draftsmanship and a remarkable range of marks. Wait, okay. I just wanted to warn you, the next image is rather disturbing, okay? I wanted again to exaggerate, like the exploding jet, I think we're all conditioned by automobiles, which are like a weapon, and we underestimate how much of our experience of nature in the world is inside the confines of an automobile. And deer, the overpopulation of deer in Baltimore County, as you know, is astonishing, as well as human population. And when they interact, it's often a fatal and devastating encounter. But I wanted to show you the force in which I've adopted to represent that energy. So the next part of this is visual literacy versus computer or digital literacy. Now you all, one of my most favorite memories of Gilman was in second grade. There was this tall, lean woman named Louise Fitzell who taught us cursive handwriting. And it made a huge impact on me. I can still remember skywriting and making these L's. You have to understand that since the Ice Age and the cave painters who lived 30,000 years ago and their expression of survival was on the very walls of their cave, is linked to our entire civilization's ability to write. And suddenly you all represent a generation, an unprecedented transition where, let's move on, where we are looking at iPhone apps and emojis. But you can hear, this is a drawing by Michelangelo with Conte chalk, and you can see how exquisitely he's respected the light of the paper to create light and volume and form of this muscular athlete. Again, this is your visual literacy. This is really challenging for me because I read the graphic tapestry of a letter or a painting in terms of the interrelationship between marks and accents. This is yours. This has really created a gulf between the enjoyment of the visual arts as it's been known throughout civilization. This is self-explanatory. I love, again, it shows the continuity, regardless of the epoch in which Caravaggio painted this saint, studying his books. It's the same, we're still human beings. You know, you have to appreciate the connection to the people that have come centuries before you and are still leaned over in thought and focus. The energy and dynamism of a water polo swimmer, and this painting by Jean-Michel Basquiat. Even it's a very contemporary piece. It's highly expressive, but you can see the similarities. The use of the expressive use of white around this figure is not unlike the swimmer. Franz Klein, a mid-century expressionist. Again, this relates more to the cursive writing, but just those economic use of dark black strokes and the way it is similar to the dynamism of that athlete. Look at the ancient Greek vase of warriors, and look at the hockey players. Look at the similarity. It's remarkable. Thousands of years separate these experiences, and yet look at the visual design in terms of the spears and the ice hockey sticks, the helmets, the decoration on the socks, of the calves. Remarkable. Again, a similar comparison. You have to understand that you're not the first generation to suddenly emerge on this planet. We're part of an unending lineage. We're all just passing through. The discus thrower. Look at the sense of touch, the extraordinary beauty of humans grasping onto a sphere. That moment is so elegant. Laocoon and his sons, a classical Greek sculpture that expresses agony and the strain, and compared to the basketball players, look at the lyricy of movement, the intertwining limbs, the curvilinear motif. George Bellows, an important Ashcan painter out of New York City, and the boxers. Again, look at the shapes created by the interlocking limbs. In the Gilman wrestler, look at that heart shape. Do you see it? Defined by the locked arms. Next. Well, you'll remember that. And then, of course, the production Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. I mean, this is interesting, related to Cézanne with obvious similarities. But Waiting for Godot, two men waiting for something that never arrives, two people perhaps like you with great expectations, entitled, talented, and yet nothing ever comes. It does not come in the mail. And perhaps at the end, what comes to you is what you least expect. And maybe that's God, and that humility to understand a sense of gratitude is emotional intelligence. I think it's interesting, Winslow Homer, a great American painter, going out and hunting in the American wilderness was a rite of passage for centuries for a young man. And you can see this is this young man with his rifle is focused, responsible. He's got his game, and then this tragedy, this outrageous phenomenon of high school shootings. Someone your age, 19, Nicholas Cruz from the Parkland shootings. And look how detached he is, how isolated he is, how unloved he is. Perhaps he's lacking that emotional intelligence that your studies provide you with here. Look in terms of an artistic element, look at the light on the antlers, which focuses on a responsible kill of the game, and look at the light on the handcuffs and chains. This is a real tragedy. And finally, I can't think of a greater sensation that contemporary work of art has had than the official commissioned portrait of President Obama and Michelle. For centuries, the portraits of our presidents have been, very conventional and somewhat decorative. And suddenly, there's this. The first African American president is painted by the first African American artist in the whole history. And look at this wonderful, sensitive portrait of a dignified, humble man who's floating in a sea of various flowers that are symbolic of Obama's birth and career. And of course, the lovely Michelle. Okay. Let's stop. Yo, bro. Okay. I want to stop here. Thank you. So this last part of my presentation is a gift, especially for you. Thanks to Carl Connolly, who is a remarkable teacher. I was blown away by the work installed throughout that basement hall. When I was here, that was like a dungeon. It was dingy. It was scary. It was an interminable hall with furnaces and dysfunctioning toilets and it was frightening. Now it's just you can tell this school is alive. And so congratulations to Carl and you. And so this is a gift for you. It's a paired work of current Gilman student work with great masters, performers, academicians, and athletes. So now we can roll. lead us to embrace our own humanity, moral conformity, and ultimately truth. God, something so much bigger than ourselves. It's not just a journey about ourselves. This